I'm Herb Faulkner. I'm one of the corporate securities lawyers at Wilson Sonsini, Goodrich, and Rosati, a little law firm down the valley that works with startup companies. And we are delighted to be able to work with Wharton San Francisco here to present this program of workshops for entrepreneurs. I can't believe this is our 26th one that we've done. And we're really excited about today because we have Randy Gottfried, who's the COO and CFO of Riverbed Technology, who's going to talk about actually doing it, rather than listening to advisors like me talk about, what it looks like from the outside. We have somebody from the inside who can talk to us today. A couple of housekeeping things just to get going. Remember, you can find all the back programs online under the tiny URL for WEP workshops. You can also just go to YouTube and put in Wharton, and generally some presentation, usually one of mine, will come up, go figure, pretty quickly. And but one thing further, the next session we have not scheduled yet. We're just planning out the new year, so watch your emails in the next couple of weeks, and we'll let you know when and where the next session is and what the topic is, and we hope to see you at those. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Randy. As I said, he's Chief Operating Officer and CFO of Riverbed Technology. He joined the company in 2004 as CFO and has held a number of titles since then, including Executive Vice President of Business Services, Senior Vice President of Business Services, and then COO. Before that, he was at Voltage Security, a security software company, and he held various senior finance roles, including Senior Vice President and Chief Financial Officer at Inktomy. He has a master's degree in business administration from Northwestern, the Kellogg School, and an undergraduate degree from the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. And he's a CPA, but more important, he's somebody who's actually lived the entrepreneur life, and we'll be delighted to hear about it. So let me turn it over to Randy.
Well, thank you very much for the kind introduction. Thank you all for joining us so early today. There are a few things to share from the experience. This is sort of one person's perspective, but one thing in Silicon Valley, key message is always be nice, because you never know who you're going to run into again. And Doug Collum, who works here at the university, was actually our outside counsel when he was at Wilson Sonsini, Goodrich, and Rosati back in the day, and provided a great connection. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak here to share the story, mostly about Riverbed. Get tucked away here. So I'll go through, again, a little bit more on Riverbed. Over my 9 years there, a lot has gone on. We'll hit a bit of a medley of topics, any one of which could be probably a full semester course. To give some perspective of myself and the company, I'll sort of set the stage a little bit. Let me just go through a couple slides. I promise this won't be sort of death by PowerPoint, but I have a few things to help sort of guide the conversation this morning. And as I said, we'll have a ton of time for questions at the end. So please think of those as we go along. So as was mentioned, I started my career back at Ernst & Young out of undergrad, which for me was a great experience. It was sort of like joining the Army. You sort of learn a basic set of skills. For me, I really wanted to expand into sort of a more forward-looking profession, which drew me to work as a financial analyst at what's now Bank of America. This was working with highly leveraged transactions in the early 90s, or the LBO boom, the late 80s, early 90s was going on at that time. So had a great opportunity for me to get involved and see sort of on a prospective basis what was happening with companies. And it helped me learn a little bit of how do you forecast, how do you understand and filter through what's sort of BS, what's real, and what can you depend on. And it provided a bit of a foundation as I went into high tech. And coming out of grad school, I thought, well, I was going to go into consulting. I lived in the Midwest, in Chicago specifically, and had aligned myself to go into management consulting, and really almost on a lark. I'd never been to the San Francisco Bay Area before, and a company called Sybase came to campus. They were going through a big growth spurt, and I said, well, maybe I'll get a visit out to the Bay Area and just check into high tech. But I figured, well, the tech boom has already come and went, and what kind of opportunity is there still left out there? I went to Sybase. Sybase, you may still hear of. They still operate under their own brand, though they're owned by SAP. But they were one of the first companies to take advantage of and come up with a real revolutionary new database technology. At the time, companies would sort of roll their own applications. You wanted a ERP application? Well, you would buy a database and get a whole bunch of developers and create your own. If you wanted a customer relationship system, you would get a database and create your own CRM. And it was a time where people who developed databases were doing quite well. When I joined Sybase in 93, we were about 1,500 people. I left in 97, there were about 6,000. So a tremendous amount of growth in that period, and learned a lot of great lessons in what to do and frankly, what not to do in a lot of cases. From there, I went to a company called Inktomi. Inktomi is a company, probably most everybody in this room has used their service, but don't know who the hell they are. So Inktomi had a couple different lines of business. Early on, the biggest one they had was a search engine. They were a big internet search engine that private labeled their services to other big name brand portals. So if you did a search on Yahoo, did a search on Microsoft, AOL, and a variety of big or small websites, the searchers actually went to Inktomi service. We'd generate the results, and the website provider would give us a small fraction of money for every search that took place. Great little business. Yahoo was one of our biggest customers at the time. In 2000, Yahoo said, geez, I found another vendor. They charge a little bit less, and they provide a little bit better search results, and so we're going to go with them instead. So they kicked out Inktomi, and they brought in Google, because they thought, Google, they're pretty good, and they'll never be a competitor, so we won't worry too much about it. Now, Google did, as time has told, Google siphoned off users over time. They had their own website, and eventually Google, or actually Yahoo, learned the error of their ways and looked to reestablish a relationship with Inktomi, and instead of signing a services deal, ended up buying the company. So I sold the company to Yahoo back in 2003. From there, I went to a company called Riverbed. And I'll give a little bit more of the history and go, obviously the focus of today will be on Riverbed. But there is a connection between Inktomi and Riverbed back in those early years.
So as you go through, could you also plot your own career paths? I mean, so what were you doing at Sybase and what were you doing at Inktomi? And what was your methodical progression as you climbed up the pole?
I would say there was some methodology and planning, and some was luck through a lot of different things. So at Sybase, I joined as a manager in the financial planning group, where I would do the forecasting, I would pull together the budgets, work with managers, and I'd been there in that role for a couple of years. We had a person in investor relations who quit. They hired somebody to replace her. The person stayed for 2 weeks and then quit. And so they said, Randy, I know we're going to try to find some other financial planning job for you. Why don't you do this job in investor relations for a little while until we find somebody? And so I did it, and I actually stayed in that role. And for me, it was a great career expansion to deal with investors in Wall Street. I ended up doing the job for about 2 years before I eventually left. It was a great sort of way to get into dealing with Wall Street, a job that you really don't get a great opportunity to do elsewhere. When I was working at Inktomi, I started as corporate controller. Helped build the company. I joined when Inktomi was probably about 40 people, building out their infrastructure. We eventually went public in 2008, so helped drive the IPO process there. I actually quit Inktomi and then was hired back as CFO a short time later. And it was a time where the bubble had burst. The internet business was fantastic when companies were spending like drunken sailors to build out infrastructure. When they turned off the spigot of capital expenditures, it really put a lot of pressure on our business, and financially we had to do a lot of major restructuring, which I was involved with, to help take a much bigger but unprofitable company and turn it into a smaller but profitable one. So again, that's probably a whole separate discussion of how do you deal with tough times and refocus a business, but it was a great learning experience. The second line of business for Inc2Me was actually a network software business. It was very different from web search. It was a software that we sold to big service providers, ISPs, to help web pages load more quickly. And very high end, we typically sell, in a given chunk, $5 to $10 million to people like AT&T and people like AOL to help run their infrastructure, which was, again, great when people were building out the internet and had a ton of money to spend. It turned out to be a lousy business when all that money went away. It leads me to sort of the Riverbed story, which was a guy named Dr. Steve McCann, who was a professor at Berkeley originally and then later worked at Inc2Me, and Jerry Connelly, who was an executive who I had known from before. Jerry was executive at Inc2Me. Both Jerry and Steve tried to repurpose some of Inc2Me's technology to work for enterprise companies, which is an area that Inc2Me never really focused on. So they went out and talked to a lot of CIOs all over the world, and CIOs were saying, I don't have a need for making web pages go faster, but I have a basic need for making my infrastructure better, faster, making mail work, not just web pages, but mail and file transfer, making my ERP and other systems work better. And there were a lot of bottlenecks that, frankly, a lot of them didn't understand. They had thrown a lot of bandwidth and network capacity at things, and things weren't getting better. So Steve McCann and Jerry left Inc2Me and formed a company called Riverbed. And I had known them before, and when I sold Inc2Me to Yahoo, Jerry asked for me to join as CFO of Riverbed. So again, always be nice because you never know who you're going to run into again. It was a fantastic opportunity. Let me transition to that as we go through some of the other topics. So this is a bit of the timeline of Riverbed. It was founded in 2002. The product went GA in the spring of 2004. I joined in the beginning of 2004, so roughly 9 years ago. 2002, 2004 was a development phase. We raised a little bit of money and got to the point of, okay, how do you commercialize this technology? And we'll talk more about that shortly. We very quickly started to expand in a lot of different dimensions. One of them geographically, going international. We went public in 2006 with the most successful IPO of the year and really sort of reignited the IPO market. Again, there was a real lull from 2000 when the internet bubble burst to the mid-2000s. We had a pretty substantial IPO, probably the first one in networking in about 5 years. And so that was a fantastic milestone for us. But you see the revenue ramp over the years. Now, when you're in 2004, there is actually a column there, 2005. Those seemed much bigger at the time, and it was very substantial. There's I think it was Rob Glazer from Real Networks, when we were doing a deal with him years ago, had a very insightful comment, which is there is an infinite difference between 0 and 1. And as you go from an interesting product where you're not selling it, to when you're actually commercializing it, someone's writing a check to you for it, that's a real big difference. And that inflection point for us was, again, in 2004. For us, it really was the start of something big. We could tell very early on, even without revenue, a lot of revenue, that the product was going to have a lot of traction.
How much did you raise before the first set of revenue?
We raised about $26 million over 2 rounds prior to revenue. The first round, I think, was about $6 million, sort of an A round, and then a $20 million round right around the time the product first came out. So we reached profitability 2007. We started acquiring some companies. Most of all of our growth has been totally organic, but had our first small acquisition in 2009, and since then have done probably about five, mostly small, with one exception, a larger acquisition that just closed yesterday. Now we're in over 40 countries. These are some of our larger offices. But in 2012, we've said publicly we aspire to do over $1 billion of revenue. We're global. We're in a variety of different product areas, and have really become a substantial player in a variety of markets: networking, storage, applications as well, or application acceleration. So I won't go into a lot of gory detail about what we do, but it's sometimes helpful to give some level set as I talk about sort of what Riverbed did, because this story today is really about some of the choices Riverbed made early on in its life cycle. So in general, the technologies that Riverbed has come up with are around understanding what's going on in your infrastructure, application, traffic, network visibility, to be able to do diagnostics, what's going on. Most of our revenue comes from this middle chunk of optimize, how to make things go dramatically faster so that you can re-architect and have still things work. And I'll talk about that in a moment. Part of the things that you're doing are trying to consolidate. People, I think, get the idea that simpler architectures involve a more centralized approach. People love the idea of it, but operationalizing it has always been a real challenge for people. Now, that sometimes seems counterintuitive. Again, a lot of our customers at Riverbed started their life of saying, okay, I got a problem, things aren't going fast enough with my network. And so the first response is, well, I put in more bandwidth. People understand, those of you who remember having dial-up years ago, there was this sort of wind in your hair when you got DSL and you thought, this is great, everything got faster. Well, from an enterprise customer perspective, why shouldn't it be the same? If you had a T1 line, which is sort of a denomination of bandwidth, if you go from a T1 to a T3, things should go dramatically faster. It turns out sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. And there are some basic laws of physics that get in the way of performance. If you have infinite bandwidth, think of fiber, light, speed of light transfer of data, the fastest thing out there, it still can be a limiting factor. From here to a server in Philadelphia at Wharton, maybe 1/10 of a second round trip, which seems awfully fast, but it may take 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 round trips to open up a file or conduct an operation with an application. So certain things that work great on your local area network, where you're physically very close and you've got a ton of bandwidth, often work poorly or not at all across distance. And it's this distance combined with the chattiness of the protocol that you're working with. So take an example. A 1 meg Excel file, you're doing a model here for a class or for work. 1 meg Excel file, to open it takes 972 back and forths from the disk to the end user. Now, there's just a lot of things that go on. Did you, here's a chunk of data. Did you get it? Yes, I did. Okay, send another chunk. That protocol, that back and forth, has a lot of purpose, but it also can be extremely slow. Now, in a local area network setting, it's instantaneous. It's very, very fast. But 972 trips times 1/10, 1/4, 1/2 of a second means that a lot of things that work great in your local area network work poorly or not at all across distance. And that was a real fundamental problem that got in the way of a whole variety of just basic, everyday, heavy lifting IT, mail, file servers, ERP applications. And it forced IT people, when they open up a new office in Chicago or in Miami or in Buenos Aires, to say, well, I don't want to, but I have to put a server out there. I have to give them a mail server, I have to give them a file server, and with that you have to have a tape backup loader to back up that data, and a contract with somebody like Iron Mountain to haul that tape away to a vaulting service. So you end up with a very expensive, complicated environment that people just didn't like, but they were forced into it by sort of the laws of physics. So Riverbed came out with a variety of technologies that at the end of the day made things dramatically faster. So for us, that's our Steelhead product line, which I won't go into sort of how it does it, what you end up doing is you put one of our steelhead devices at each one of your remote sites, and it's your data center. We intercept traffic. We make things go dramatically faster, and not 20, 50% faster. We're talking 20, 50 times faster. And with that dramatic performance improvement, you can start consolidating a lot of your infrastructure that you just couldn't consolidate before. That provides our customers with a fantastic ROI. We sort of piggyback on the concept of if you can consolidate, you don't take the number of bits away, but you get the economies of scale of everything at the core. You get the extra security of things in a central location. There's a lot of goodness that comes from having centralized infrastructure. And so that really was a very horizontal problem. We sell to anybody with 2 or more offices. It's not just a financial services industry or education or manufacturing. Anybody who has more than one office typically runs into these sorts of issues, and it really has fueled our growth from day one. Now, over time, we've added a variety of other technologies, Cascade, which is our sort of visibility and diagnostics capability, Whitewater, which is a storage optimization product, Stingray, which has to do with application acceleration, but most, probably over 80% of our revenue right now comes from the Steelhead product family. So when you hear that story, hopefully you go, geez, that sounds really compelling. Of course it's successful. And so you look at other companies, you look at Facebook, you look at Google, you look at others, and you go, well, of course that's a brilliant idea, and no wonder they made a lot of money. Now, 8 or 9 years ago, or 10 years ago, who knew? And you could say the same for pretty much any successful internet or technology company. You don't really know when you start. What are you going to have? Despite the pitch, what really is the truth? I've seen a lot of startup pitches over the years, and they all start to look the same. Some innovation that's brand new to the world, where they're going to be some unique technology that differentiates themselves from others. No matter what, they're going to have a 2x2 grid graph, and they're going to be in the upper right. You can tell who knows what the dimensions are going to be. Gartner, one of the third-party analysts, has a dimension of ability to execute and visionary. But at the end of the day, you're going to show yourself in the top right. Startups are going to talk about an untapped huge market that will yield a ton of revenue, and you're uniquely suited to tap into all those different things. And it's going to be the start of some huge revenue and profit train that will make everybody a lot of money. Now, you could photocopy that or use that template for pretty much every startup in the Valley. Now, those of you who've actually driven around Silicon Valley see strip malls littered with companies with shuttered doors that it didn't work. And it turns out not everybody actually was able to execute or deliver or realize some of the things promised in their PowerPoint presentation. So how do you filter? And for me, that was a struggle. I knew some of the people from before, but when I joined Riverbed, I got the same thing. This is going to be huge. Had no revenue. So how do you make a decision early on? So there were a few, for me, thumbnail things to think about to help filter out, the wheat from the chaff. Yeah.
So, as you joined Riverbed when?
I joined in February 2004, and the product was in beta, but it had not yet gone GA.
So was part of your mandate to assist with fundraising from that point forward?
It was. Now, I had the luxury of coming in after a round of funding, so I had a little bit of runway for us to actually start generating revenue before we had to go back to the market.
So here's my question, which is, as you go through these questions, is this what was running through your mind in making a decision whether to join Riverbed? Or is this kind of the outward-facing perspective that you had when you were talking to potential investors?
This, in a very selfish way, was, where do I go to work? Because, if you're a VC, you have a portfolio of companies. If you're an individual, you got one job. And you can't bet that 1 out of 10 will work. So you have to do some filtering to increase your odds. Again, a VC has a very different attitude where they can be a little bit more, they can think more of a portfolio than they can think of where my portfolio is of my time. I'm not splitting between 10 different companies. I have to make a bet. And so these were the things to help me make that bet into where to go. Now, again, I knew some of the people from before, which helped me answer these questions in a better way. The first is, does it make sense? The phrase I hear periodically is, can I explain it to my mother? What I found over the years is the more arcane, the more difficult it is for someone to explain what they do, it often means the market is probably not big enough, or somebody's just a poor explainer, which is another reason maybe you don't necessarily want to work for that person. But does it make sense is a big deal, and I'll go through sort of the Riverbed answer shortly. How big is the market? I see a lot of situations where people are sort of the king of the tiny market. That makes you feel good, doesn't make anybody any money, and usually doesn't last very long. Have customers or anybody else validated this technology? What was very insightful, and probably one of the things that got me over the hump at Riverbed was we were in the beta stage when I joined. And beta, if you're familiar with the development process, is you've got a product that's pretty much all coded and it's working, but you want to work with a customer to see if it actually works in their environment. Well, companies are often loath to do that. You're working with a product that's pre-GA, it takes time, you probably don't trust it to put in your production network, so it can be a bit of a pain in the butt. Now, at Riverbed, we had probably 20 beta customers, and we were turning away. We could have had 60 beta customers if we wanted. And for me, it was very telling that, hey, this stuff really works. There really must be a demand, because people were willing to go through that pain to beta test the product. So that was a pretty major milestone for me. The management team was a big filter. Do people who are smart, they already made the decision to work there? I'm not a technology person. I rely on sort of pattern matching and sort of I look for the smoke to find the fire sometimes. And for me, it's, do good, smart, technical people, overall a good management team, have they already made that bet on the company? And that gives me some comfort, along with other things, that I too would be making a good decision. Good venture capital behind it. There's some different thoughts about, you have high-end VCs, or sort of the big name brand VCs, and then you have a lot of other people that range at the other end of the spectrum of sort of dumb money. People who have money and want to get in on deals. Now are people like Kleiner Perkins and Sequoia and Excel so much smarter than everybody else, or do really good companies just gravitate to high-end VCs, and it becomes sort of a virtuous cycle? At the end of the day, though, a good VC typically is a good moniker, a good certification, as part of a broader sort of fact pattern checking that you've got a better company that you're looking at. And for me, Excel partners and a couple other high-end VCs were supporting Riverbed. And that said, again, technical people at those companies had validated that they think the market is big enough, and the approach and the management team were good. Third-party confirmations, industry analysts, they were also saying similar things. All of that combined, again, any one data point is tough to rely on, but the combination of all that, for me, gave a good indication that Riverbed had the potential to be something very, very special. They had a business that was explainable, it made sense, the market was substantial. I looked at customers, I looked at management team, both the quality and the fact that I knew them from before was a big deal to me. Top tier VCs, industry analysts were all supporting the idea. So that all in combination gave me comfort that I could look through what turned out to be the same PowerPoint as everybody else was pitching at the time. So there's a few areas I'm going to touch on. Again, that it's a bit of a medley, but it gives a little bit of insight from Riverbed. And our business is different. It's not an internet service business or a cloud or consumer-oriented business. But for us, these are some of the things that we thought about for products, and I'll go into markets and financing and all the things later. So just a few bullets in each of these slides as talking points to start a dialogue. So the first choice that any entrepreneur has when they're coming up with an idea is, what is that product? And really, what is more than just the top level, but what are you going to have? What are the features you're going to have? Who you're going to go after? Now, too often, people try to boil the ocean. They think of the product that's 3 years out. Well, it turns out, Development is you sit at a blank screen and start coding something. Now, you don't wait 3 or 4 years. You need to have something that, whether it be a prototype or that first generation, that is compelling enough to start generating both either interest or money or both. And too often people don't think about how they're going to do it. Turns out a market, and this sort of dovetails into a sort of a market discussion. When people are developing a product for a customer, customers are not all the same. You know, a consumer product is not for all consumers. You've got men, you've got women, you've got older people, you've got younger people, you've got people in the US, people in different countries. There are a ton of different slices of data, different verticals. You've got a spectrum upon spectrum upon spectrum of subsets of markets. So it becomes very difficult. So many people, and we've made the mistake ourselves over the years at Riverbed and other companies I've been at, where you think, well, I've got 20 different segments, each with about 20 minimum features. That's about 400 features I need. I'm going to build in 300 of those features, and I should get 75% of the market. And you come out with a product, and you get crickets chirping. The magic is, and I've seen this so many times over, you have to satisfy somebody. You have to have 100% of the minimum features for some segment of the market. And I think that was actually an important point for Riverbed. For Riverbed, we came out with a product that was not for everybody. It was for enterprise customers, but it was probably great for a medium-sized enterprise. And very quickly, we were able to leverage that to expand our coverage into other parts. So since then, we've gotten into much bigger enterprises, much smaller, more and more verticals. But you have to figure out and pick your battles. There are different ways to think about this, and probably with multiple speakers up here, you'll get multiple opinions. My view is I hate to be the 8th guy in a market. I would rather be the #1 low-sudsing detergent than the #8 general laundry detergent. Unless you think you've got something so compelling you can go from 8 to 1. But there's a real sense you need to be #1. And that flavor is sort of how you come up with that first product to something that's truly either commercial or at least attractive to a customer. There are plenty of people who wait a long time before they try to generate money from their technology. You think Google, think Facebook, think others. But at the very least, you have to have some subset of your customers who are interested in what you have to sell. Now that said, it has to be a big enough market. Like I said earlier on, you have to have, it's great to be king of something, but it better be big enough to be useful. Or something you can quickly leverage to expand the reach. So over the years at Riverbed, while we started more sort of mid-market, we quickly expanded to the high end. We expanded geographically. We expanded different products to complement what we were selling so that our reps, we could leverage the fact that we have sales reps in the field and partners in the field who are helping to sell our technology.
Is it okay to throw questions?
Sure.
I keep doing it, but
Yeah.
I should ask. So I've heard it said that in order to have a startup company that can realistically attract institutional venture capital, you need to be able to identify a meaningful market of at least $1 billion. Is that, I mean, how, can you comment on that? Is that accurate from Riverbed's perspective?
I've not heard a specific threshold, but yeah, you know, if you're a VC and you're looking for whom to invest in, yeah, you're looking for that magic. Is it big enough? Now, going back to the generic presentation everybody uses, I guarantee you it says $1 billion plus. Now, what do you truly believe? And part of it's, you know, what's your path to get there? You may start with a smaller subsegment, but have the ability to expand into it. And I think that's a lot of people's pitch is, okay, we'll start with we'll start with small, medium-sized businesses and move into large enterprises later, as one example. But yeah, it's got to be compelling because, you know, you're not going to have, nobody has 100% market share. So it has to be a big enough market to be attractive. At the same time, I look at presentations all the time from startups who want to sell themselves to Riverbed, and they say, well, all I really want is 1% of a $10 billion market. Well, I don't believe that either, because it's just too hard. You know, you have to figure out why are you compelling. I can't just bet the odds that you can get 1% of a huge market. There has to be some compelling reason someone wants to buy you, buy your technology. So those are all the things, and there's a lot of choices one makes early on in the product development cycle to get there. And something that was definitely some time that we spent at Riverbed to try to get the right focus. Now, again, not to spend too much time on stories, but we had the luxury of being in a space and developing a solution that there really was no good substitutes for. And the economics were really compelling for customers to buy it. So we were not well suited to large enterprise customers. That said, we had a big financial institution, thousands of locations, who was working very closely with us and loved us, even though we didn't necessarily meet a lot of their needs. And it was because they saw the future in us. And for us, it was fantastic. It sort of goes against a lot of things I said, was trying to focus your efforts into what you could be really good at. It actually stretched us to the point where it forced our product to be better. You know, when a big major bank in New York calls you and say, hey, your stuff doesn't work, we would collapse on that problem in development, in our technical support organization, in our global capability to make sure that worked. And that forced us to get better and frankly was a great accelerator for our business because it forced us to be good. Therefore, we could go to get other big customers and point to this one example as why we were better than anybody else for high-scale deployments. Other scale being lots of sites, lots of data, lots of diversity in their infrastructure.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Would you mind sharing some insight as to your partnership or collaboration with the product organization, especially as stepping in as CFO and tying it to the business?
So yes, there's a lot of collaboration and interaction. I find that I can't do my job as CFO without understanding the product pretty well, because at the end of the day, I got a lot of people asking for another dollar. And if I don't understand the product well enough to talk, at least in some reasonable level of conversational ability, I can't do my job. Riverbed is product management oriented, meaning, and there's different companies. Some companies are very sort of chief technology officer oriented, where Apple was a situation where they didn't do focus groups because Steve Jobs had an idea that this is the product. Customers don't even know what products they want. Which is viable for some companies if you've got a really good CTO. We end up being probably more product management oriented, where we go and ask customers what they need. You have to add some secret sauce of some insight into what you think that they want that they don't realize they want as well. I spend a lot of time trying to talk through issues. At the end of the day, you have to get good people that you trust, because I don't know, nor do they know sort of that you're going to spend $1 million on a feature or a new product that may or may not generate revenue, and so you're going to have to make some bets. Even internally, we make venture capital like bets where the pitch sounds good, they've at least thought it through, but until you develop it and see in the market, is there a real demand for it, or can you build it to a sufficient capability that it's marketable? You just don't know. So I almost think of myself as sort of a VC for new ideas of the company. I can ask all the right questions, but I ultimately don't know because I'm not at the code level detail to be able to say differently. Once you got a great technology, how do you get it to market? And there are a variety of ways. Again, this is from the perspective of Riverbed. This is not a cloud offering or a service offering. These are technologies that we're selling to enterprise customers. Now, there are sort of waves and different ideas on how you reach out to customers. It's very tempting early on. You got this is a time we had probably 40 or 50 people when the product was GA. How the hell am I going to hire that many sales reps to make a dent and generate all the revenue I think is possible in this business? You think, well, let's immediately go indirect. Let's go through channel partners. Let's OEM our technology to somebody big and have them embed our software onto their stuff, which has a lot of appeal. Geez, boy, that's quick to market. You instantly get thousands of somebody else's sales reps selling your technology. We actually looked into it. Thankfully, nobody really was interested, because it turns out these types of technologies are sort of high touch, and they're not especially well suited for somebody to pick up without any kind of support and sell on their own. It was probably the best thing that happened to us was that lack of interest from an OEM partner, or lack of interest to the point of not really going through with it. We then went what I think is probably a lot smarter for an early company, which was at least starting direct. That allowed us to go to customers, get that direct relationship, understand what was going. It provided a great feedback channel to our product development group. It allowed us to understand how to best sell it. Now, that was very useful and insightful as we try to build out the business. Now, there was, another inflection point sometime after that, after we had a few reps and we had some experience selling this in the field, where we said, now we're at the point where we can expand our distribution and expand our reach. So we made a very conscious decision in about 2006 to go indirect. And that we tried to use VAR channels, value-added resellers, who would buy our product and sell to end users. And it proved to be very, very exciting. Now, making that transition is always very difficult. Now, it's easy for me and our CEO and others to say, let's go do this. But in the field, you're telling a sales rep to give away points, discount points, to someone else, lose control of the deal to a certain extent, and hope it all works out. So we, like a lot of companies, believe that proper incentive setting is a big deal. And for your field sales, it means how you set up your compensation structure. So we set up very specific incentives. If you sell it direct, you get a certain commission. You sell it through a partner, you make a lot more. And that helped drive our business very, very quickly from almost 100% direct to right now 95% indirect. And that allowed us to build the channels and get a reach far broader than we could have gotten on our own.
So just another quick question. So the OEM channel didn't work because it was a high-touch product and difficult to effectively convey what it was about through the OEM channel. But the VAR channel did work. So did the product become more user-friendly and easier to use? I mean, how did you overcome the high-touch aspect when you switched from OEM to VAR?
I would say a couple things. The product itself didn't change much. It still required some touch in the channel. Now, because we had built out some direct capability already, we were able to help. So while the channel partners added leverage, if there were 10 meetings to close a deal, maybe we only had to go to 5 or 6, but we still had to be there. And even to this day, even with big partners, there's still some touch involved. So we needed some capability and critical mass on our side to help with the selling process. You could say that OEM could be the same way. It turns out for VARs, you feel like you got more control because they're actually just buying a product from you. The VARs tend to be smaller and more manageable. They tend to have more technical resources. It fits into their model better. But there was some real leverage there. Yes, it's still a relatively high-touch sale. Yes?
And how did your sales force change? Did the early bag carrying guys, were they your classic sales guys, and then did it change? And if so, how? I'm thinking maybe more technical support sales, but is that what happened?
It really didn't change very much. Now, if you look at our staffing internally, it looks and smells a lot like a direct sales company. Now, we get a lot of leverage. As an example, these are just orders of magnitude, not specific numbers from Riverbed. In a direct sales model, maybe you get $2 million out of a rep in the field. We can get several times that out of a rep in the field because it's actually leverage sale with a channel partner.
So you are selling through the channel today?
Yeah, and so what happened is our direct sales reps in the field who had been carrying a bag and trying to drive a deal to closure are actually still doing that. The orders get fulfilled through the partner. Hopefully we're getting some leverage. Like I said, maybe we don't have to go to every meeting. But so that's how the partner earns their points. They earn their points from generating some leads themselves, carrying some part of the load, because almost all of our sales involve some proof of concept before they buy. Sometimes it involves even them doing some technical support post-sale. There's a variety of things that we look to our partners to do to earn the points, the discount points that we give them as part of the sale. Sometimes it's as simple as you got to take on the credit risk of the end user and the contracting aggravation and all the exposure there, which has value in and of itself.
How did you choose the VARs?
We chose them based on who had a good capability. Now, for Riverbed, which is sort of a unique technology, sort of new to the world, there weren't existing WAN optimization VARs, WAN optimization being the key category that we sell in. We found that storage VARs could do a real good job, because storage people were already doing projects to try to pull in storage from the edge. We found that, for those familiar with VMware, so VMware is a technology that a lot of people use to try to consolidate a lot of their IT into fewer locations, either lots of applications onto a single server, or in many cases, pulling in applications from a wide variety of locations into a single location. Now, turns out that's sort of what we do, and we help that. We became a key enabler. So VMware partners turned out to be really good working with us. They had demand, and they also had the skill sets to work with us. So you sort of pick and chose over the years, and you end up with sort of overlaps with other companies who are selling to similar problem sets. Maybe not necessarily WAN optimization, but to consolidation issues. So that was good for us. Other big topic: how much do you charge for this? This is a new to the world technology. What's the price? Do you charge $1? Do you charge $1 billion? What's the right price? So for us, we looked at a variety of things. One of which was, how much savings are we providing? And you can quantify very easily the value of pulling a server out of a remote location. Turns out one of the byproducts of our optimizations is you also take off 80 to 90% of the bits off your network. So there's bandwidth savings there. We wanted to make it compelling too. So yes, we're savings, but we also wanted to be sort of something so simple you could do on the back of a napkin. So our products typically pay for themselves in less than a year. So we're probably leaving some money on the table. We could have conceivably charged more. It would have been a harder sales price, a harder sales process. There are probably some customers who may find the technology not as compelling because their use case may be slightly different. But we chose to have an extremely compelling, easy to choose option of buying Riverbed, and they'd save money. And that's largely how we came up with our pricing methodology.
Are you able to monetize the savings of performance of employees where speed is almost, you can't really measure it, but people feel like they're working faster? We just moved a bunch of servers out of our headquarters into a data farm.
Yeah.
So everybody's coming into our ERP system through a terminal server. And everybody's like, it just is a little bit slower.
I would say, so productivity improvement is part of what we pitch. Can we sell against it? It depends. Sometimes, most of the time it's very useful, and most of the time, yeah, that savings you can quantify. Okay, you've got people who are doing this many hours. You free up by making those things go faster. That absolutely is a key thing for us. In fact, one of our first big customers was Gensler Architecture. They're based here in San Francisco. They've got architecture offices all over the world. They build huge developments and dams and things like that. When they had a new project, they'd have to fly architects around. They had extra resources in Detroit, and the project in Beijing, they would fly them because the files were too big to move, literally, and they would be otherwise flying disks around because of the performance issues I described. By using our technology, they can leverage extra resources around the world and all collaborate on the same applications. That's huge for them. So that was a very big deal, and that was part of the productivity play. Now, I will tell you that when we first went into the China market back 10 years ago and tried to sell, we had a customer tell us, if you make all my people faster, what do I do with them? Because they need to find jobs for everybody. And so they were willing to live with that inefficiency because that wasn't a premium. They weren't now the market has changed where there's a little bit more of a labor shortage now where they care more about productivity. When the recession hit in 2008, people who were buying based on productivity wasn't so important to them anymore. They were willing, they had extra capacity in their organization. It was harder to justify a sale to make things a bit faster. Now, the good news for Riverbed is so much of our value proposition is really around this consolidation, which is far more dramatic and tangible. Sometimes making people work faster is sometimes a softer ROI, and so it depends on the company. The other interesting example, we try to make a sale into a professional services organization. They're saying, So if you make things faster, I have few hours to build to my customer. Now, turns out professional services quickly embraced our technology, but some of the early feedback was actually quite negative because they were nervous. What happens if you make all my people operate faster? I actually lose money.
So I mean, I don't have an MBA, so I didn't take a class on product pricing, but there is a bit of voodoo involved in that, isn't there?
Yeah.
I mean, it's trial and error. Let's try this price and see how much traction we get in the market. And geez, we're not selling it for enough, so we can actually bump the price. I mean, did you guys go through that where you kind of, you throw a flyer out there and see what happens?
We did, and but there were some other products, though not doing exactly what we were doing, that were sort of benchmarks, where it sort of kept us honest and sort of gave us a relevant range to work within. And then we chose some pricing that we thought made a lot of sense given the payback that the product offered. So, but it is difficult. And then you have, again, with a lot of products, you have even more infinite choices when you think, well, do you just sell it up front? Do you sell it on a cloud model where it's more of a monthly subscription? So there's a lot of choice that takes place. For us, a upfront sale at the price points we described seemed to resonate pretty quickly and allowed us to grow. We didn't want to start so high and slow our growth. For us, we thought it was we still think it's a very, very big market. There is an advantage to being a market share winner. Now, again, not to go too much into technology, but again, how I described our product, you put our product at every one of your remote sites in your data center. The value to a customer is a big deal. Once they standardize, you don't mix and match vendors. So that being that first in that customer's location is a big deal. So we didn't want pricing to get in the way. We wanted to make money, but we didn't want it to be a blocker or spend a lot of time in the sales cycle defending it. Yes, sir.
Sort of a more general question. It seems like you probably have a lot of entrepreneurial spirit and risk tolerance, or you wouldn't have jumped into these pre-release companies, for example. Early on, did you decide your skill set was more appropriate and beneficial for a CFO type role, or was there a point where you were thinking that you would be a co-founder, technical co-founder, sort of the creative energy behind an enterprise? And maybe, I know there is an internet audience, so maybe repeat whatever portion you want them to hear.
Sure. So the question is on sort of me personally. Is this something that I embraced early on, this idea of going to an entrepreneurial company with a high degree of risk? First, I always enjoyed being CFO. I love this. Unfortunately, I'm a genetic organizer, and I love sort of making sense out of a mess. And that's some of the joy of working with a growing company, of building the process and building the company. And I also liken it to cooking. I love to cook big meals and have a lot of friends over. And it's basically one big project management exercise. And I love that concept from a small company. You're literally not given a whole lot. You're given a bunch of stuff. You have to make some bets on where you're going. You have to have a certain appetite for risk. If you're truly a pragmatic person, thinking about all the risks and things that could go right and wrong, you will never work at a startup, because odds are it's not going to do well. You have to make somewhere a leap of faith that you're willing to take a risk on something that probably won't work, because you've got at least the foundation that could be turned into something good. And I think I have that. I really enjoyed my role at the company. When I eventually wanted to try different things or start a company, yeah, that's possible. But I enjoyed being CFO and helping sort of crafting the operations and feeling like I'm making a difference. Not to digress too much, my family early on had a small business. My dad did, and we went in once. I went in once on a Saturday with them, and my dad was head of sales at this family business, and he had me putting together an exam table because he sold to doctors' offices. I said, "Well, you're head of sales. What am I doing putting together an exam table? Don't you have somebody else to do it?" He goes, "If you don't do it, I have to do it." And there's that sense of rolling up your sleeve and sort of digging in that I've actually always enjoyed. and feeling like you make a difference. And that's one of the joys of working for a smaller growing company is, boy, you feel like you make a difference every day. And that's still true at Riverbed for me, is that when things are moving that fast and you have a lot of choices to make, it's that sense of accomplishment and tangible sort of value add every day. And to the extent that goes away, well, that changes the feeling. But for me, that's partly why I love my job.
Thank you.
I want to make sure we keep on time. So again, some other things and dimensions and choices that we made early on as a company. So coverage was a big deal. So again, what channels and how many people you hire, all these things are sort of blank slates that you have to figure out as a startup company. One was sort of, where do you go? It's great to be very successful and make a success in one location and then expand geographically. But again, this was a market where it was very much a green field. We didn't want other people to come in. We're also forced a little bit by the dynamics of our own technology. As I described, you put our products everywhere. So that meant our first sales went all over the globe. That forced our hand a bit and forced us to go to, our first offices were in San Francisco, followed by Seoul and London. And I think since the early days, we were adding probably a new country in which we operated every quarter. So that puts a tremendous strain on the organization. There are a lot of challenges working with outside the U.S. I remember I had to fly out. We had a person we hired in France who was not working out. I had to fly out overnight to have a discussion with them on their performance and fly back the next day because there was a 10-step process in France to make a personnel change. Every country has their own dynamics. I probably sign 20 things a day so that we stay compliant in Russia. Every one of these countries has their own obligations, nuances in doing business, hiring. How do you get people paid? How do you make sure you stay compliant with local tax and regulatory regimes? For us, it meant building a sort of a whole machine on doing it. So we became pretty good at it, using local partners for accounting, for eventually setting up our own service centers around the world to deal with just infrastructure issues. Yes, sir.
And when you go into a new country, would you usually hire local people first or send somebody out there from here as an expatriate type position?
Almost 100% of the time, we'd hire local people.
How do you find them from here?
What's that?
How did you find them from here?
We would typically find local recruiters that we trusted and go after companies that we've had a good track record pulling from. So the skill sets I described in channels also plays out into how you hire. So we would go after is probably the wrong phrasing. We would look for people with storage backgrounds, from network appliance, from EMC, from people from VMware, people from Cisco, a big networking company, one of our key competitors. There's a sort of short list of people that we go after. Using local recruiters, we would spend time. So we would spend time on the road interviewing people. We'd bring people back to San Francisco. So it took some time. And oftentimes, if you started with a more senior person, they could help hire more junior people after that. But yeah, that first hire in a new country that you weren't there before can be tricky. Now, there's also an evolutionary path to this. Oftentimes, we'd start with maybe a local partner. Because a partner, you can filter out partners who are good. You can experiment a little bit. And we've had some mulligans where we go into a country, start with the wrong partner, go to a new partner. Sometimes those partners can introduce you to reps that they deal with, again, because they're dealing with some other complementary technologies and say, hey, NetApp has a great guy who we work with. He'd probably be good for you. Right. So that was a little bit. But our general approach was hire somebody local rather than an expat. For us, it seemed to be far better received by the end user, who we were also trying to work with, and the partners too, to have somebody local, local language expertise, local customs expertise, and that's worked out well.
How did you ramp manufacturing? That's something you're going to go into.
Yeah, so a bit more about our technologies. Almost all of our revenue comes from technically hardware sales. Almost all the value add is software. There's actually nothing proprietary in the device we sell. We contract with a variety of manufacturers, Dell being one of them. I was just in Asia last week meeting with a contract manufacturer in Taiwan. They take basically commodity server components, put our faceplate on it, but the magic is our software. If you were to visit our office, which is really right down the street here in San Francisco, it looks and smells an awful lot like a software company. People often ask for a tour and go, this is very uninteresting because this is the cube where we do development, this is the cube where we do accounts payable, this is the cube where we do technical support. So we're basically buying finished goods, we load it with our software, and then ship it to our customers. So the manufacturing side is actually quite easy. You still have supply chain issues, you still have a variety of things you have to work with, but we don't own factories, we don't have some of the aggravation that somebody who builds all of their stuff has to deal with. We don't have the proprietary components, specialized chips that also add additional complexity. Yes?
So it's really great to get the perspective of someone who's sort of been through the life cycle of the company. I was curious how your pain points have changed from early on when you had to educate the street up through running the IPO process and now having to deal with managing earnings.
So how the pain points have changed. I think there's a few things. I think one of the themes is just how to deal with growth. Now, early on, it was just how do you hire enough people? I mean, we were growing at 20% a quarter on just headcount. The headcount of the company is growing 20% quarter on quarter for multiple years. Now, that just takes a good chunk of your day just to interview people. If you have any kind of filter in who comes in versus who you actually give an offer to, that is a challenge in and of itself, is to have a machine that can sort of process that many people to bring them on board. Now, we still hire a lot of people, but the percentage growth is a lot easier to manage now these days. You have the challenge of just how to keep the business moving forward. Sometimes you look at PowerPoint and you go, this quarter I just have to do about a half an inch more revenue than I did in the column before. Well, turns out every quarter I got to start from scratch and sell. So that means having your field get progressively more productive, because we also look to make more money every quarter too. So looking for field productivity. So the nuances change a bit. Early on, you're building a model, and your pain points are starting things from scratch. As you move on, it's, well, how do you tune things, and how do you transition? What made sense for 0 to 50 million of revenue has no applicability, 500 million to $1 billion, and it includes people. There's some fantastic people we've had at Riverbed over the years, and I think a lot of companies can say this. People who were perfectly well suited to one stage who are really not the right people going in a different stage. And so you have those challenges. You could say the same thing for infrastructure. We've gone through several major ERP systems at Riverbed. I could have put the highest end one in when we were 4 people or 20 people in the company. It wouldn't have made sense because I would have needed 10 IT people to run an infrastructure of that capacity. So you're constantly evolving, and some things are a step function, like IT is one example, where you have to think not just where I'm going to be in the next 6 months, but what do I need 3 years from now. The market evolves, so everything's changing around us. So competitive landscape has evolved. The pain points for us, expectations keep going up. So we as a company, I think, have done well on almost every measure. Now that said, people's expectations, they get used to it, and they want ever more. So managing expectations is always tricky as you get farther along. Again, I'm not talking about this year, but in prior years, if you're constantly overachieving, people expect you're going to overachieve. And so if you don't overachieve enough, we got beat up a couple quarters, 2008, 2009, 2010, where we were overachieving, 5-10% every quarter. You overachieve 3 or 4%, which is still a win in most books, but you get clobbered because people expected you to do even better. And so managing expectations gets tricky. So there's a variety of things that sort of evolve as the company does.
Just one other thing on people.
Yeah.
So I hear you in terms of recruiting the quantity of people you needed to. Where in the business were teams most important? And that even if you got the right people on the bus, them working together was the entire key. So which functions were most dependent on that teamwork?
All of them. And I can't even say there's just certainly development Certainly in sales, you have to be team. There's not a function I could think of at the company that doesn't rely on people working well together. And I will tell you that the question earlier on pain points, our hit rate on hiring was pretty good. Wasn't 100%. And while we almost always got technically great people, we sometimes found ourselves in situations where you had people who didn't play nice with others.
So how did you deal with that in scaling out and also nailing the team dynamic?
Yeah. Sometimes it always means coaching and good feedback. And so just good personnel management, providing a feedback loop when things aren't working, giving people coaching, giving people training. It's always easier to make an existing employee better than to fire somebody and bring in somebody from scratch. So we always did that. Now, and it really cuts across all of our groups. Once you do that and it doesn't work, then you have to make a change. And there's a lot of examples, over the years where you had people who didn't necessarily work well in a team environment. They were individually fantastic, but when there's so much going on, an individual can only do so much. I think of, again, in sales, we have a team model. You've got a sales engineer, you've got a sales rep, you've got inside salespeople who are working closely in a territory. You've got a partner that they're teaming with. So that team dynamic plays out there. In the development organization, you've got a variety of people working on different components. You've got quality assurance people who are working with those people to ensure that the quality is good. In the finance area, you're trying to establish a process. A quote to cash involves a lot of different people. Procure to pay involves a lot of different people. And it involves individual capabilities, but also the ability to work well with others because things are always changing. How do you make changes if people aren't getting along? So it ends up being a thematic thing that goes on. A lot of my job ends up being HR. Our assets of the company are intellectual property, inclusive of our people. And so that's one of the biggest things we do is hire really good people, coach them, make sure they continue to grow, and filter out those who don't work. Now, we've been lucky in that our hit rate is extraordinarily good, but it's not 100%. So, again, in the interest of time, who do you choose and when is a big deal. Similar to systems the comments I made earlier, do you hire a super senior person when you got 25 people? They may have wonderfully strategic thoughts, but do they know they got to go? One of my first things, I was hired as CFO, and I'd been a CFO before. One of my first jobs was to go to Costco and pick up the coffee for the kitchen. And you have to be willing to do that early on, and you have to have people who are willing to roll up their sleeves and get stuff done. That can be tricky because you can't necessarily hire somebody who's appropriate for a 25 or 50 person company either, because you won't get anywhere. What I look for when I hire managers in my group and what we look for senior people around the company is who has a vision. I want somebody who can come in and figure out where we're going, who has that experience and expertise, but they also have to be willing to roll up their sleeves. And that's true today, it was true then. It was probably more acutely an issue early on because, again, you may hire a brilliant person who has been a senior person in a development organization and say, you've got to do a lot of coding yourself. Some people aren't necessarily well suited to that, to do sort of coding and management and product management and do all the things. So having that multi-purpose capability is a tricky thing. So how many do you hire? There are, with every person that brings on board, we love them, but it's another mouth to feed. Which means my run rate of expenses has just gone up. So we try to be very careful in building that run rate of expense so that we don't get ahead of revenue. Where to put the next dollar? I mentioned early on I'd worked in leverage buyouts in the early 90s. That transitioned at working for a commercial bank to working in what's called workouts, which is working with all the people who can't pay you back. And it was a great experience because where you put that next dollar becomes very, very critical. How you triage all of the different requests you get. And I found that skill set has been very applicable even in high growth settings. Even with what turns out to be an almost unlimited pool of venture capital money, you still had a finite amount of hours in the day, and where you put that next dollar ends up being a very big deal. So it helps to have a plan. I mentioned I'm a chronic organizer and project manager, and that's proven to be a very useful skill. That said, I think one of the things that I've learned over the years is when to throw that plan away, because things are happening in real time. Maybe you develop a product that doesn't really work as well. Maybe you've got a customer who's upset. Maybe you've got a system that doesn't work as well. And sometimes you have to say, I know I've got a budget, I know I've got a plan to do something, but we've got a real-time decision to make. And it means having the flexibility and that appetite for risk to say, I'm going to wing it because I know I have to get the business right. You know, all the financial stuff is great, and it's nice to have charts that go up and to the right. But at the end of the day, I have to have a good, solid core business where we're offering something compelling to our customers. And that often means throwing out the plan to make sure that we don't lose sight of the prize. That is the prize, is to have happy customers, because they will be the generation of our revenue in the future. And that may mean some blips in some of our pretty charts, but it's always served us well to have that perspective.
Is there a point you ever came close to running out of cash, and at what point were you able to bring in debt financing?
At Riverbed, I've not had that problem. So at Riverbed, in fact, we went cash flow positive pretty early, in part because the business sort of took off. At other companies, I had issues. You know, I remember it was Thanksgiving 2002. I got a call from a bank. You know, we had $390 million at Inktomy. I got a call from the bank saying, "Hey, I only see $12 million here. Is there something we're missing?" And it turns out, you know, we had gone through a tough spell, and we're at a trough in our cash balance. But it is a challenge. You know, debt financing is possible for a small company. Sometimes it helps with the optics. You know, when you're selling to a customer, they look at your balance sheet, they go, okay, you've got some cash. They sometimes ignore the fact that you've got debt. Most of the banks who deal with venture debt will craft their debt covenants such that it's really hard to spend that cash. So I'm not a big fan of debt early on. Now, as a company matures, we, for example, have a long history now of really solid cash generation. We have financed some acquisitions with debt because we've got a long, sort of stable track record to make sure it makes sense. But you know, the higher the risk profile, probably the less appropriate debt is, especially when you deal with covenants, because covenants can really get in the way of your business. Because the other sort of more generic theme on money is when you don't need money, it's easiest to get it. When you really need the money, when things are going bad or or things you haven't proven themselves yet, it's oftentimes more difficult. So there's a yin and yang and sort of fueling the business of when do you raise money. If you're a startup, do you raise a lot of money in your first VC rounds? Well, that can be really tricky. I remember early on at Riverbed, if a sales rep was on the road and charged in a cup of Starbucks coffee, I had to sell another 20 shares of stock. And so that money is so precious early on. Now, as time goes on and those big valuation differences are less extreme, well, then that's the time where you think, well, maybe I'm going to pig out a little bit on venture capital or on the public markets to make sure I have more than enough cash. But yeah, the overall theme is if you don't need money, that's usually the time to raise it, because it becomes very problematic if you run into a situation where you really need it. Those are oftentimes people don't like desperation and won't fund you. So I think we've got about 2 minutes left. Any other questions I could answer? Yes, sir.
Right now you've got the CFO, COO role. As the company continues to grow, do you see that responsibility dividing, and what's that been like so far?
I would say, in general, having the COO and CFO title, I technically just got the COO title a little bit earlier this year. My job didn't change, but my business cards did. And part of it was because as CFO, a lot of my job was just getting things done. Now, in addition to the traditional finance functions, I also manage manufacturing, I manage IT, and again, since day one, I've been sort of helping drive the operational success of the company. If you eventually split those jobs, it's possible. That's something that could happen over time. Right now, it seems to work okay, but it depends on depends on the people and depends on the company's challenges at the time.
Well, we promised to get all of you out of here by 9, and it's 9 right now. So thank you very much. for coming, Randy. and
My pleasure.
all
Thank
the
you for having me.
interesting stories. I know Doug and I were sitting here, elbowing each other, saying, "Ooh, I like that. Can we steal that?" So hopefully you'll let us borrow a couple of your ideas.
Of course.
So, and thank all of you for coming. We will be doing. I'll be doing office hours as usual for about an hour after the session. There's some signs that tell you where to go, and we'll see you next time.
Oh, thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Oh, my pleasure. Great.
Oh, good.